The First Punic War was far more than a clash between two powers. It was a struggle for dominance over the Mediterranean. Rome, an emerging land power, and Carthage, a formidable maritime empire, both sought control of Sicily. This ambition sparked a brutal 23-year conflict that reshaped the ancient world. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome had solidified its control over the Italian peninsula, having defeated neighboring tribes, the Etruscans, and Greek colonies. With approximately 400,000 citizens and a total population of 3 million, Rome's strength was undeniable. The Republic's military might stemmed from its disciplined legions and a highly organized alliance network that could quickly mobilize large numbers of troops. Despite this land-based dominance, Rome lacked a significant navy and had no experience projecting power overseas. In contrast, Carthage had much older roots, founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers. It had evolved into a prosperous city-state with 200,000 residents and a vast commercial empire. At its height, Carthage ruled over 3 million people across North Africa, southern Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of Sicily. Carthage's wealth was built on trade, with its navy securing control over vital Mediterranean sea routes. This naval dominance made it the richest city in the region. Although relations between Rome and Carthage had been peaceful, growing competition between Rome's expansionist ambitions and Carthage's maritime power made war inevitable. The Messana crisis was the spark that ignited the First Punic War in 264 BC, escalating an isolated conflict into a full-scale confrontation between Rome and Carthage. It began when the Mamertines, mercenaries who had seized control of Messana, were besieged by Hiero II of Syracuse. Fearing defeat, they appealed to both Carthage and Rome for assistance. Carthage, eager to expand its influence in Sicily, sent a garrison of 12,000 soldiers under Hanno's command to occupy Messana. However, the Mamertines, concerned about losing their autonomy, switched allegiance and sought Rome's support. Rome, seeing an opportunity to check Carthage's growing power in Sicily, dispatched Consul Appius Claudius Caudex with 9,000 infantry and 500 cavalry across the Strait of Messina. Despite Carthage's naval superiority, the Romans successfully crossed and quickly defeated the Syracusan forces besieging the city. Rome then engaged Carthage's troops in a pitched battle, using disciplined infantry and skirmishing tactics to drive Carthaginian forces into retreat. The conflict resulted in 6,000 Carthaginian casualties compared to 1,340 Roman losses. The Siege of Agrigentum in 262 BC marked Rome's first major land victory of the war, involving a prolonged and intense confrontation between the Roman Republic and Carthaginian forces in Sicily. The Romans, led by consuls Lucius Postumius Megellus and Quintus Mamilius Vetulus, brought a vast force of around 40,000 men to besiege the city. The Carthaginian commander, Hannibal Gisco, held a much smaller garrison, but had fortified the city and gathered nearly 50,000 civilians from the surrounding areas for protection. The Romans began the siege by cutting off the city's supplies through a network of trenches and small forts, a tactic known as circumvallation. Hannibal initially tried to disrupt Roman foraging operations, but was repelled. After months of stalemate, Carthage sent a relief force under General Hanno, consisting of 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 war elephants. The Romans, however, managed to lure Hanno's forces into a trap, outflanking and defeating them. The relief army suffered heavy casualties, losing 3,000 infantry and 200 cavalry, forcing Hanno to retreat. In the early phase of the war, Rome faced significant difficulties at sea due to its lack of naval experience. Carthage, with a fleet of over 350 warships and highly skilled sailors, dominated the Mediterranean. Determined to compete, Rome built its first fleet of 120 quinqueremes in 260 BC. However, early defeats, such as the loss of 17 ships and the capture of Consul Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina at the Battle of the Lipari Islands, revealed Rome's vulnerabilities. To counter Carthage's superior naval skills, Rome developed the Corvus, a boarding device that allowed their soldiers to board enemy ships and transform naval battles into land-style engagements. This innovation proved decisive at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. Under the command of Consul Gaius Duilius, The Roman fleet faced a Carthaginian force of 130 ships, led by Admiral Hannibal Gisco. Despite Carthage's greater experience, the Romans captured 31 Carthaginian vessels using the Corvus and sank 13 more, forcing Hannibal to retreat with the remaining fleet. This victory marked Rome's first major naval success and demonstrated the game-changing effectiveness of the Corvus. Rome's newfound naval prowess culminated in 256 BC at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus, one of the largest naval battles in ancient history. Both Rome and Carthage committed vast numbers of ships and personnel to this clash. The Romans, led by consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus, deployed 330 warships carrying around 140,000 marines and rowers. Carthage, commanded by Hamilcar and Hanno the Great, fielded 350 warships manned by nearly 150,000 crew, making it a massive confrontation involving nearly 290,000 men. Rome aimed to break through Carthage's naval defenses and launch an invasion of North Africa. Carthage countered by attempting to maintain control of the sea. The Roman fleet formed a triangular formation, with their horse transports protected in the center. The battle split into 3 separate engagements, with Carthage attempting to outmaneuver the Romans, but ultimately failing. Using the Corvus boarding device, Roman marines boarded Carthaginian ships, transforming the engagements into fierce hand-to-hand combat. After suffering heavy losses, the Romans sank 30 Carthaginian ships, captured 64, and lost 24 of their own vessels, securing a decisive victory. This victory secured Roman control of the seas, paving the way for their first invasion of North Africa, a strategic move that would alter the course of the First Punic War. Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus landed with 15,000 infantry and 500 cavalry near Aspis, quickly capturing the town and using it as a base to raid the Carthaginian countryside. Within months, he had taken over 20,000 prisoners and secured key victories at Addis and Tunis, pushing Carthage to the brink of collapse. In desperation, Carthage hired a Spartan mercenary commander, Xanthippus, to reorganize their defenses. In the spring of 255 BC, Xanthippus led a Carthaginian army consisting of 12,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 100 war elephants to confront Regulus near the Bagradas River. The open terrain favored the Carthaginian cavalry and elephants, which overwhelmed the outnumbered Roman horsemen and threw the Roman infantry into chaos. Regulus's legions were encircled and crushed. Only 2,000 Romans managed to escape, while 12,000 were killed, and Regulus himself was captured along with 500 others. This disastrous defeat ended Rome's campaign in Africa and forced them to abandon plans of swiftly ending the war by threatening Carthage's homeland. The defeat also demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of war elephants, which would shape Carthaginian strategy for the remainder of the conflict. The Siege of Lilybaeum, which lasted from 250 to 241 BC, was a grueling 9-year standoff between Roman and Carthaginian forces in western Sicily. The Romans, fielding a massive force of over 100,000 soldiers and supported by a naval contingent of around 200 ships, encircled the city to cut off Carthage's primary base of operations on the island. The Carthaginian garrison, led by General Himilco, defended with a much smaller force of 7,000 infantry and 700 cavalry, relying on strong fortifications and effective counter-siege tactics. The Romans made several attempts to breach the city, using siege engines and constructing elaborate earthworks, but the defenders held firm. Constant counterattacks by the Carthaginians undermined Roman positions, prolonging the siege. Meanwhile, Carthage sent several relief fleets in an attempt to break Rome's naval blockade, resulting in a series of intense naval skirmishes. The prolonged siege drained resources on both sides, forcing the war to shift focus back to naval engagements. The stalemate was finally broken on March 10, 241 BC, at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, the decisive naval clash that ended the First Punic War. The Roman fleet, commanded by Gaius Lutatius Catulus, consisted of 200 warships, while the Carthaginians, led by Hanno, fielded 250 ships. The Carthaginian fleet, heavily laden with supplies and manned by poorly trained crews, gave the Romans a critical advantage despite being outnumbered. The battle took place off the western coast of Sicily. Using superior tactics, the Romans intercepted the Carthaginian fleet in rough seas, taking advantage of their more maneuverable ships and seasoned marines to secure a decisive victory. The Romans sank 50 Carthaginian ships and captured 70 more, while their own losses were minimal. The defeat crippled Carthage's ability to continue the war, forcing them to sue for peace and accept the terms of the Treaty of Lutatius, which resulted in the loss of Sicily. Carthage was required to pay 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years, draining its resources and marking the beginning of its decline. Meanwhile, Rome's power grew, setting the stage for future expansion. Humiliated and weakened, Carthage sought to rebuild, and this resentment would eventually fuel the Second Punic War, led by Hannibal's vow for revenge. If you enjoyed this video on the First Punic War and want to see more epic historical battles, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video on Rome's rise to power. Thanks for watching!